But Bob, there's been some pretty important events in the last few weeks with respect to voter fraud, voter registration rolls, and election integrity. And in particular, what comes to mind, of course, is California and Kentucky. So, in my view, when the voter rolls are dirty or when they're loaded up with people that aren't alive or whatever, the vote itself, the election, can be called into question. Yeah. Talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we've come up with in the last few weeks.
Well, we have a project to sue and to pursue lawsuits under the National Voter Registration Act. And, stop me if I get too much like a lawyer, but basically it's a statute that everyone knows is the motor voter bill.
Right.
This is Clinton's bill. You can register at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the trade-off was there's a provision that states have to take care of their voter rolls. They have to make sure that people who've died, people who moved out of state, maybe years, maybe decades before, are no longer on the voter rolls. And it seems that the first part is scrupulously adhered to, and the integrity provision is instantly ignored.
So register everybody you can, but once you have, make sure the voter rolls are accurate, true, complete, current, the information's correct.
Well, the best example of this is our California lawsuit. I mean, the Clinton Justice Department, the same Clinton administration that helped pass the motor voter bill, in 1998 told the state of California, we will sue you unless you agree that you can't remove people under this particular set of conditions, which is that you send them a letter and they don't respond. The problem is that the law says you can remove them or start to remove them after a couple of elections if they don't respond to the letter. And so they were telling the state of California to ignore their own state laws and to do something contrary to the text of the statute under their strange reading of it. So almost immediately you have a Democratic administration making war on the statute. Now, in 2003, the law was amended just to make clear that the way they thought about it was wrong. Okay, but that consent decree was still out there, and it was still acted on by California. Well, fast forward to 2017, the state hadn't enforced the National Voter Registration Act the way it was supposed to be enforced in 20 years.
Right.
There are 5 million active registrants in Los Angeles County. On top of that, there are 1.5 million inactive registrants. These are overwhelmingly likely to be people who moved somewhere else.
Or died, or any other
over
number.
The course of 20 years, they could have moved to 5 states. They could have moved to Europe.
Sure.
They could be dead. Okay? And so what we told them was that we're suing you. You haven't enforced the National Voter Registration Act. You have to start sending letters and removing people pursuant to the statute. And they agreed to do it. And I guess, it's one thing to agree to do it. It's another thing to actually start acting. Well, in the past couple of weeks, they sent 1.6 million cards to people who are believed to move to other states. Now, we have to start at square one because they haven't done anything in 20 years.
So, I mean, the fact that they even picked their heads up for a moment and took this first initial step is a huge victory.
And it's not all that we want, but the law is you can't just yank people off the voter rolls, and that's not a bad law. That's a good law.
Kentucky, though, is another case or another situation where
same kind of situation.
40% of the county voter rolls had this outrageous number of people registered to vote over adults that were actually resident in the counties.
Well, that's what we look for. Every couple of years, the Election Assistance Commission, it's a federal agency, puts out its survey of every state and every state's query of every county. That's the theory. You don't always get all the states. You don't always get all the counties, but you get enough to work with. And we hire a professional demographer, someone who knows his way around the census numbers. And what we're looking for is counties where the registration rate exceeds 100%, because that's hard to defend.
Sure.
And so what you're looking for is counties where the number of voter registrations is larger than the number of citizens over the age of 18 who could register under the law. Well, Kentucky, as you said, it had 48 counties out of 120 were underwater, so to speak. They had more registrations than citizens who were eligible to register.
None of this is a surprise to local election officials who know what their voter rolls say.
Well, right, yes. And it's not a surprise, first in California, where you just don't enforce the law for a couple of decades. It wasn't a surprise in Kentucky, where Secretary of State Grimes hadn't enforced the law since 2012, claiming a lack of money, a lack of funds. It was a different type of situation. They didn't have a pass from the Clinton Justice Department,
Right.
but all the same, they just didn't enforce the law. And after a couple of years, voter rolls start to go bad immediately. People die, people move all the time.
Sure.
So you leave it alone since 2012 and you're going to have a mess, and that's what they've had. Now, they sent out 250,000 cards, smaller state, smaller registration. The entire state is smaller than the county of Los Angeles.
Right.
But, that's progress. That's 7% of their voter rolls.
Bob, I want to get back for a second to talk about some of these election integrity projects, what I view to be huge wins, and that has to do, of course, we've talked a little bit about California and Kentucky, but there's some other litigation that we're bringing in California on another matter, not necessarily related to voter rolls, but on the election process and ballots themselves. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in California.
Sure. Well, California doesn't like Donald Trump. And Donald Trump said he won't release his tax returns. He hasn't released them. He won't release them prior to 2020. That's his position. And so California thought, the legislature, let's pass a law saying in order to run in the primaries in California, you have to release 5 years worth of tax returns. And the Secretary of State then has to post them online. Okay, and if you don't do that, you cannot be in the primary.
Would that affect any Democratic contenders?
It would affect 3.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting.
Joe Biden just released his. It used to be 4, but it would affect Tulsi Gabbard, Julian Castro, and Mr. Yang.
So does California have the authority to supersede the requirements of a federal election for president?
It turns out that they don't. There's a couple of qualifications clauses in the United States Constitution, one for the president, one for congresspersons. And the one for the president says you have to be of a certain age, you have to be a citizen for so long, and just rock solid Supreme Court precedent for years has indicated that that's that.
Otherwise, states, any number of states, could make up any sort of rules they wish to.
Sure.
You can't run for president if your
primaries.
if your initials are DJT. Or,
Right. But what the Supreme Court rationally has determined is that the rights of voters are tied up with the rights of candidates. If you start restricting who can run on silly reasons or even for plausible reasons, and I don't think this is a plausible reason, you start to hurt the voters who want to vote for them.
If you're a concerned citizen, no matter where you fall on this political spectrum, no matter who your favorite candidate is, but you're interested in fair, complete, truthful, accurate elections, what can individual citizens do who are watching at home?
Well, that is a broad question. I mean, I'll give you a sort of nuts and bolts answer and then a bigger picture answer.
Sure.
I mean, the nuts and bolts of it, I would say become a poll watcher. I mean, work for your county. You sit behind the desk, you check people in. It helps in all these situations, whether or not there's voter ID in your particular state, whether or not there's a requirement for a photo ID in order to vote.
Right.
It helps if you're a member of the community and you know the people in your community. It creates a nicer atmosphere and you can be aware if something strange is going on. You'll have to look at state law, and I'm sure there are websites to help you become a poll worker. Poll worker is different from a poll watcher.
That's important. So there's a poll watcher and a poll worker. Give us the difference.
Well, poll worker works for the state or works for the county. Poll watcher is a partisan, and there are special rules typically that apply to them as well. And they often, but not always, can challenge someone as, you don't live here, I didn't hear your name, but that there are other rules and restrictions with regard to them. You can become a poll watcher for your party, but these are important, crucial things. But, I would just say, also be aware of these issues. Judicial Watch is going to do its study. In fact, its study's been completed and we're assessing the results, in which we look at what I told you about earlier, which is which counties have more registered voters than they do citizens who could register. I would say, the national average is about 87. High 90s is a problem, but certainly over 100% shouldn't happen.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. When we make a press release or an announcement about what we found, and we start to send out letters telling people there's a problem, pay attention if it's your county. I mean, that would be one thing I'd encourage. And